millionaire and homeless mother uncover the heartbreaking mission of a 6-year-old girl collecting cans every night. The metallic clink echoed through the dark alley as Emily's tiny fingers reached into another dumpster. At 6 years old, she had mastered the art of silence. Her small frame, barely visible in the shadows, moved with practiced precision between the towering buildings. A passing car's headlights briefly illuminated her dirt-smudged face and determined eyes. In the distance, police sirens wailed the sound that always made her heart race. But Emily couldn't stop. Not tonight. Not when her mother's medicine cost more than yesterday's tears could buy. Before we dive into this touching story, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your like means the world to us. Now, let's begin this incredible journey. The fourth-floor apartment at 247 Brunswick Street hadn't seen maintenance in years. Water stains crept down the walls like brown tears, and the single window cracked at its corner, whistled with every gust of wind. This was home for Emily Bennett, though home might be too generous a word for the 200-square-foot space she shared with memories and silence. At 6 years old, Emily had developed routines that no child should know. Each morning, she would wake before sunrise, careful to avoid the creaky floorboard by her thin mattress. The apartment's previous tenant had left behind a plastic Mickey Mouse alarm clock, her most treasured possession, though Mickey was missing an ear and one arm permanently pointed to 3 o'clock. Her morning ritual began with counting the money from last night's collection. Quarters, dimes and nickels spread across a faded yellow towel on the floor, arranged in neat rows like soldiers awaiting inspection. Emily had learned to count money before she could read properly, necessity being her harshest teacher. The kitchen consisted of a hot plate balanced on a cardboard box and a mini fridge that hummed louder than it cooled. Inside, half a loaf of bread and some peanut butter represented her weekly provisions, carefully rationed to last until the church's food bank opened again. The sink dripped continuously, each drop marking time like a broken metronome. Emily kept her school supplies in a worn Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles backpack, a find from the Salvation Army store 3 blocks away. Her teachers at Patterson Elementary hadn't noticed yet that she wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, carefully washed in the bathroom sink each night. She'd become expert at explaining away the dark circles under her eyes, spinning tales about staying up late watching cartoons instead of revealing her nightly scavenging missions. The walls of her apartment told stories of their own. Crayon drawings covered the worst of the water damage bright, hopeful scenes of her mother, healthy and smiling, standing under yellow suns and beside blue houses. In one corner, a calendar marked with red X's counted down to her mother's next hospital visit. Emily had created a makeshift desk from a wooden crate, where she diligently completed her homework each afternoon, determined to maintain her average despite everything. Hidden under her mattress lay her most precious possession, a leather-bound journal her father had given her before the accident 2 years ago. Its pages held not just her thoughts but her plans, detailed maps of the best dumpster locations, schedules of when restaurants threw out their recyclables, and careful calculations of how many cans she needed to collect each night to meet her goals. The bathroom mirror, clouded with age, reflected a child forced to grow up too fast. Emily had learned to trim her own honey-brown hair with kitchen scissors, though the results were predictably uneven. She'd also mastered the art of washing her school uniform in sections, allowing each piece to dry overnight on a string stretched across the bathroom. A small shelf above her mattress held her emergency supplies, a flashlight with spare batteries, a first aid kit pieced together from donated supplies, and a jar of quarters for the building's laundry room. Beside these sat a framed photograph, the only one she owned, showing her mother in healthier days, laughing as she pushed Emily on a park swing. The apartment's sole window offered a view of the city's downtown skyline, its gleaming towers standing in stark contrast to her immediate surroundings. At night, those distant lights became her companions, silent witnesses to her determination. She would often sit on her makeshift bed, watching the planes blink across the sky, whispering prayers that one day, One of those lights would lead her to a solution for her mother's illness. Despite its shortcomings, Emily kept the apartment meticulously clean, a task she approached with the same determination she brought to everything else. Each evening before heading out, she would straighten her bed, arrange her few possessions, and ensure everything was in its proper place. The organization gave her a sense of control in a world where so much remained beyond her grasp. The space might have been lacking in material comforts, but it held an abundance of hope and resilience. Every corner, every crack, every water stain told the story of a little girl who refused to be defined by her circumstances. This wasn't just an apartment, it was a fortress of solitude, a base of operations, and a testament to one child's unwavering love for her mother. At St. Michael's Memorial Hospital, room 417 had become Sarah Bennett's world for the past 8 months. The steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of hospital-grade cleaners created a symphony of sickness that seemed to seep into the very walls. Sarah, once a vibrant kindergarten teacher with laughing eyes and endless energy, now lay pale against starched white sheets, her once thick brown hair replaced by a colorful head scarf, a gift from a sympathetic nurse. Breast cancer had invaded not just her body but their lives with the stealth of a midnight thief. The diagnosis had come too late, a common story for those who couldn't afford regular checkups. Sarah had ignored the initial symptoms, attributing them to stress and overwork, continuing to teach until the day she collapsed in front of 20 frightened 5-year-olds. The treatment protocol was aggressive and expensive. Each chemotherapy session cost more than 3 months of Sarah's former salary, and the mounting hospital bills arrived with the regularity of autumn leaves, piling up in unopened envelopes on her bedside table. Without health insurance lost when the school district cut back on part-time teachers' benefits, every treatment became a battle not just against cancer but against bureaucracy. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, an oncologist with kind eyes and graying temples, had become their strongest ally. She fought with the hospital administration to continue Sarah's treatment, despite the growing unpaid bills, often working creative magic with billing codes and treatment schedules. "Your mother is a fighter," she would tell Emily during her visits, though her eyes carried shadows of concern that even a 6-year-old could read. Sarah's hospital room walls were covered with get well cards from former students and drawings from Emily. She kept her daughter's latest artwork directly in her line of sight, a reminder of why she had to keep fighting. The small TV mounted in the corner remained perpetually tuned to educational channels, a habit from her teaching days she couldn't break, even now. The worst moments came during the chemotherapy sessions when the powerful drugs made her violently ill. These were the times she was grateful Emily couldn't visit, the times when she could let the tears flow freely, mourning not just her health but the childhood her daughter was losing. The night nurse, Mary, would often sit with her during these dark hours, offering silent comfort and occasionally slipping extra blankets or pain medication her way. Between treatments, Sarah tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She helped Emily with homework over the phone, her voice steady even when her hands shook too much to hold the receiver properly. She kept a journal of things to tell Emily during their precious visiting hours, determined that her daughter would never feel the full weight of her illness. The social worker assigned to their case, James Parker, had tried to help navigate the labyrinth of assistance programs and charity organizations, but the waiting lists were long, and their situation was dire. Each rejection letter felt like another nail in a coffin Sarah refused to acknowledge. She had even attempted to sell her engagement ring, her last connection to Emily's father, only to discover it was worth far less than she'd hoped. Other patients came and went from the ward, their stays marked by either celebration or silence. Sarah made friends cautiously, having learned the hard way that not every story had a happy ending. Still, she shared her daughter's drawings with anyone who showed interest, her face lighting up with pride as she described Emily's achievements at school, never mentioning the weight of responsibility crushing her young daughter's shoulders. The treatments had begun to show modest progress, but time was running out in more ways than one. The hospital administration, led by the ruthlessly efficient Mr. Thompson, had made it clear that they couldn't continue providing care without payment. Each week brought new threats of discharge, each one more strongly worded than the last. Sarah spent her conscious hours alternating between prayer and planning. She had already arranged for Mrs. Peterson, a former colleague, to care for Emily if the worst happened, unaware that her trusted friend had already abandoned her post. The thought of leaving Emily alone in the world haunted her more than any physical pain the cancer could inflict. Yet somehow Sarah managed to smile whenever Emily visited. She would straighten up in bed, adjust her scarf, and summon every ounce of strength to appear better than she felt. Their conversations stayed deliberately light school stories, neighborhood gossip, plans for future adventures they both knew might never happen. But behind every smile, behind every gentle touch and whispered "I love you," lay a mother's desperate fear not of death itself, but of leaving her child to face the world alone. Mrs. Victoria Peterson had seemed like a godsend when she first offered to help. A former colleague of Sarah's from Patterson Elementary, she presented herself as the perfect guardian experienced with children, living nearby, and seemingly driven by genuine concern. The arrangement had been simple. She would check on Emily daily, ensure she was fed, and maintain some semblance of normal life while Sarah underwent treatment. The first signs of trouble were subtle. Grocery money began disappearing faster than food appeared in the apartment. Emily's school lunch account ran empty despite Sarah's regular transfers to Mrs. Peterson. The promised weekly visits dwindled to occasional phone calls, then to unanswered text messages. But the true depth of the betrayal ran far deeper than mere negligence. Unknown to Sarah, Mrs. Peterson had been running a sophisticated scheme. She had set up a GoFundMe page using Emily's story, complete with heart-wrenching photos secretly taken during hospital visits. The campaign had raised over $30,000 from sympathetic donors across the country, money that never reached Sarah or Emily. Instead, it funded Mrs. Peterson's gambling habit at the Golden Eagle Casino on the outskirts of town. The apartment's utilities began shutting off one by one. First the cable, then the internet services Mrs. Peterson had promised to maintain with the money Sarah provided. She explained away each disconnection with elaborate stories about billing errors and technical problems. When concerned neighbors called to check on Emily, Mrs. Peterson intercepted the calls, assuring everyone that the situation was under control. In reality, Emily spent her evenings alone in a darkening apartment, teaching herself to navigate life's complexities through trial and error. Mrs. Peterson's visits became increasingly erratic, marked by the smell of expensive perfume and the rustle of shopping bags from high-end stores. She would sweep in, take photos for her fraudulent social media updates, leave a few dollars worth of groceries, and disappear again. The betrayal extended beyond financial exploitation. Mrs. Peterson had been intercepting hospital bills and late notices, preventing Sarah from understanding the true gravity of their financial situation. She forged Sarah's signature on payment plans she never intended to fulfill, pushing the family deeper into debt while maintaining the illusion of management. At school, she painted herself as Emily's devoted guardian, accepting praise from teachers for her selfless dedication while pocketing the gift cards and donations meant for Emily's school supplies. The school's parent-teacher association, moved by what they believed to be Mrs. Peterson's generosity, even nominated her for a community service award. The woman's web of deception grew more complex with each passing week. She began hosting fundraising dinners at local churches, sharing Emily's story with tears in her eyes, while collecting donations that would never reach their intended recipient. The local newspaper even ran a feature article about her tireless efforts to help a dying woman's daughter, complete with staged photos of her pretending to help Emily with homework. Most cruel was her manipulation of Emily's hope. She would regularly promise special treats, new clothes, or trips to visit Sarah, only to cancel at the last minute with increasingly elaborate excuses. Each broken promise chipped away at Emily's trust, teaching the young girl harsh lessons about adult reliability. Despite living just 3 blocks away in a recently renovated townhouse paid for with embezzled donation money, Mrs. Peterson maintained the fiction of being too busy helping other families to spend time with Emily. She kept up appearances by occasionally dropping off day-old pastries from the local bakery, presenting them as fresh-bought treats while pocketing the receipt for tax deductions. The depth of her deception became clear in her detailed record-keeping, not of Emily's needs or Sarah's medical updates, but of donation amounts, donor contact information, and potential future marks for her schemes. Her phone contained hundreds of photos of Emily, each carefully edited to emphasize the girl's apparent poverty, ready to be deployed for maximum emotional impact on social media. In her rare moments of guilt, Mrs. Peterson would justify her actions by telling herself she was teaching Emily valuable life lessons about self-reliance. She convinced herself that her occasional food deliveries and brief visits were more than many children had, that she was doing enough by simply keeping up appearances. The true tragedy lay in how effectively Mrs. Peterson had isolated Emily from other potential help. By presenting herself as a dedicated guardian to the outside world, she had effectively blocked other concerned adults from recognizing the extent of Emily's abandonment. Her carefully maintained facade of care had become a prison wall, trapping Emily in a solitude that no 6-year-old should ever have to experience. The first time Emily encountered Martha Williams, the temperature had dropped below freezing, and the wind whipped through the alleyways like angry whispers. Martha sat huddled beneath a faded blue tarp in the doorway of the abandoned Wilson's bakery, her weathered face partially hidden beneath layers of mismatched scarves. To most passers-by, she was just another invisible resident of the city's shadows. But to Martha, Emily's small figure methodically checking dumpsters stood out like a beacon in the darkness. "Child, what are you doing out here at this hour?" Martha's voice carried an unexpected warmth, touched with what might have been a southern accent. Her eyes, sharp and clear despite her disheveled appearance, followed Emily's movements with concern. The girl startled, nearly dropping her bag of collected cans, ready to run as she'd learned to do when adults asked too many questions. But something about Martha was different. Perhaps it was the way she sat straight-backed, despite her circumstances, or how her hands, though dirty, moved with deliberate grace. She wore multiple layers of clothing, all carefully mended, and beside her sat a shopping cart containing neatly organized possessions, including what appeared to be medical supplies. "I'm collecting cans," Emily replied cautiously, keeping her distance, "for my mom's medicine." Martha's expression shifted, a flash of recognition crossing her face. Without a word, she reached into her cart and pulled out a small paper bag. "Come here, child. When did you last eat?" The question caught Emily off guard. Mrs. Peterson hadn't brought groceries in days, and the bread in her apartment had grown moldy. As if on cue, her stomach growled audibly in the quiet alley. Martha's outstretched hand held half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper turkey on wheat, still fresh. "I can't," Emily started, but Martha cut her off with a gentle firmness that seemed oddly familiar. "Sit down and eat. These cans aren't going anywhere, and you need your strength." There was something in her tone that brooked no argument, yet carried no threat. As Emily hesitantly took a seat on an upturned milk crate, Martha continued, "Tell me about your mother." Over the next hour, Emily found herself sharing more than she had with anyone since Mrs. Peterson's disappearances began. Martha listened intently, asking occasional questions that suggested a deeper understanding of medical terminology than one might expect from someone living on the streets. Her eyes narrowed at the mention of Mr. Thompson, the hospital administrator, and widened slightly at the description of Sarah's treatment plan. "St. Michael's, you say?" Martha murmured, more to herself than to Emily. Her fingers unconsciously touched a thin chain around her neck, hidden beneath her layers of clothing. "I know that place well." As they talked, Martha's facade occasionally slipped, revealing glimpses of someone who spoke with precise diction and used medical terminology with the ease of long familiarity. She asked about Emily's school, her grades, and her daily routine with the thoroughness of a social worker, yet her questions felt like genuine concern rather than professional obligation. Before Emily left that night, Martha insisted on checking her bag of cans, efficiently organizing them to prevent cuts from sharp edges. She also produced a small first aid kit from her cart, cleaning a scratch on Emily's hand with the practiced movements of someone with medical training. "Come find me tomorrow night," Martha said as Emily prepared to leave. "This alley isn't safe for a child alone," she hesitated, then added, "and Emily. Be careful around the loading dock behind the Super Save. The security guard there, he isn't kind to can collectors." As Emily walked away, she didn't see Martha pull out a small notebook, meticulously recording the details of their conversation with a pen that seemed too expensive for her circumstances. Nor did she notice how Martha's eyes followed her until she turned the corner, or how the woman's posture changed once she was alone, becoming more rigid, more professional, more like someone who had once worn a white coat instead of layers of salvaged clothing. That night marked the beginning of an unlikely alliance. Martha became Emily's silent guardian, her presence in the alley as reliable as the stars above. Though Emily didn't realize it yet, she had found more than just a friendly homeless woman. She had found someone who would change the course of her life, someone whose own story was as complex and carefully hidden as the contents of her mysterious shopping cart. The crisis at St. Michael's Memorial Hospital unfolded on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning. Mr. Thompson, the hospital administrator, strode into room 417 with the mechanical precision of an executioner. His tailored suit and gold cufflinks seemed to mock the sterile poverty of the hospital room. Behind him, 2 security guards lingered in the doorway, their presence an unspoken threat. "Mrs. Bennett," Thompson began, his voice as cold as the rain outside, "we've been more than patient. 8 months of treatment, barely a fraction paid. The board has made their final decision." He placed a document on her bedside table, the hospital's letterhead gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. "You have 72 hours to make a substantial payment, or we'll be forced to discharge you." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the paper. The numbers seemed to swim before her eyes. $157,843.222 in outstanding charges. The minimum acceptable payment line read $25,000. It might as well have been $1 million. Dr. Morrison, who had slipped into the room during Thompson's speech, stepped forward. "James, this is unreasonable. Sarah's responding to treatment. Moving her now could." "Could what?" Rebecca Thompson cut her off. "Cost the hospital more money we'll never see. We're not a charity," he turned back to Sarah. 3 days, Mrs. Bennett. After that, we'll arrange transfer to the state facility in Carson City." The state facility. Sarah's heart sank. Everyone knew what that meant: overcrowded wards, overworked staff, minimal care. Dr. Morrison had once called it "where hope goes to die" during a private conversation. The nearest one was 4 hours away, too far for Emily to visit. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "My daughter. She's only 6. I can't be that far from her." Thompson's expression didn't change. "Perhaps you should have considered that before accepting treatment you couldn't afford." He checked his Rolex. 72 hours, Mrs. Bennett. The clock is ticking." After they left, Dr. Morrison stayed behind, her face etched with concern. "Sarah, let me make some calls. There are foundations programs." "We've tried them all," Sarah interrupted softly. "The waiting lists are months long. Even the experimental trials have income requirements." Now she clutched the payment demand notice, her knuckles white. "What happens at the state facility, Rebecca? Tell me the truth." Dr. Morrison sank into the visitor's chair, suddenly looking every one of her 55 years. "The care is basic. They'll continue chemotherapy, but not the targeted therapy we've been using. The pain management protocols are less sophisticated, and the success rates." She trailed off. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely. "How long would I have there?" 6 months. Maybe less. The doctor's honesty was brutal but necessary. "Sarah, let me help. I could speak to the board." No, Sarah's voice gained strength. "You've risked enough for us already. I won't let you jeopardize your career." She wiped her eyes, determination replacing despair. "But I need one favor. Don't tell Emily about the transfer. Not yet. Let me find a way first." As night fell, Sarah lay awake, listening to the steady drip of her IV and the distant sounds of the hospital. The payment notice sat on her bedside table, a paper guillotine waiting to fall. She thought of Emily, out there somewhere in the darkness collecting cans to save her mother, unaware that her efforts were like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The night nurse, Mary, came in to check her vitals. "I heard about Thompson's visit," she said quietly, adjusting the IV drip. "That man has a heart of stone and a soul of ice." She hesitated, then added, "There's a woman who sometimes sleeps in the park across the street. Used to be a nurse here, they say, before. Well, before things went wrong. She helps people find ways sometimes. If you want, I could." No, Sarah interrupted, though gently. "No more schemes, no more tricks. Emily needs one parent who stays honest, no matter what." She managed a weak smile. "But thank you, Mary, for everything." The nurse squeezed her hand before leaving, and Sarah was alone again with her thoughts and the ticking clock. 72 hours, the same amount of time it had taken to bring Emily into the world. Now she had that long to figure out how to stay in it for her daughter's sake. Outside her window, the city lights blurred through her tears, each one representing a home where mothers weren't forced to choose between treatment and bankruptcy, where children didn't have to grow up too fast in the shadow of hospital bills. Somewhere out there, her daughter was fighting a battle no child should have to fight, while Sarah fought another in this sterile room, both of them running out of time. The loading dock behind Super Save should have been empty at midnight. Emily had timed her visits carefully over the weeks, learning the rhythms of the night shift workers and the security guards' rounds. But tonight was different. As she approached her usual spot, muffled voices and the glow of cigarettes cut through the darkness. "Well, well, what do we have here?" A man's voice, thick with mockery, emerged from the shadows. Two figures stepped into the dim light: Joey Winters, the new security guard with a reputation for cruelty, and a smaller, wiry man Emily didn't recognize. The smell of alcohol hung in the air between them. "It's that can collector kid," Joey sneered, flicking his cigarette in Emily's direction. "Been watching you, little thief. Taking what ain't yours." His uniform was unbuttoned, security badge glinting menacingly under the dock's single light. Emily clutched her bag closer, taking a step backward. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she remembered Martha's warning about this place. The second man moved to block her retreat, his movements predatory. "Those cans belong to the store," Joey continued, advancing. "And you've been stealing from us for weeks. Time to teach you a lesson about private property." His companion chuckled, a sound that made Emily's skin crawl. Panic seized her throat as they moved closer. The bag of cans clinked traitorously in her trembling hands. She knew she should run, but her feet seemed frozen to the concrete. Joey reached for her arm. "Leave her alone," the command cut through the night air like a blade. Martha stood at the entrance to the loading dock, her shopping cart abandoned behind her. In the harsh security light, she looked different, taller somehow, her usual stooped posture replaced by something more imposing. Joey laughed. "Mind your own business, bag lady. This doesn't concern you." "I've called the police," Martha stated calmly, though Emily saw no phone in her hands. "They're very interested in reports of a security guard harassing children, especially one on probation for assault." The color drained from Joey's face. "You're bluffing." Joseph Michael Winters, age 32, previously employed at Riverside Mall until an incident with a teenage shoplifter. Martha's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Would you like me to continue?" The second man backed away, melting into the shadows. Joey's swagger faltered. "How did you?" "The police will be here in 2 minutes. I suggest you leave." Now Martha's eyes never left Joey's face, her expression unchanged even as he cursed and retreated into the darkness. The moment they were gone, Martha's demeanor shifted. She rushed to Emily, hands moving with professional efficiency as she checked for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" Emily shook her head, tears finally breaking free. I was so scared." "Shesh, you're safe now." Martha's embrace smelled of old wool and something antiseptic, oddly comforting. "But you can't come back here. It's not safe anymore." She pulled back, studying Emily's face. "Promise me." Emily nodded, still trembling. Martha gathered the scattered cans, placing them carefully in Emily's bag. As they walked away from the loading dock, Emily noticed how Martha kept scanning their surroundings, positioning herself between Emily and the shadows. "How did you know those things about him?" Emily asked finally. Martha's pause was almost imperceptible. "The streets have their own newspaper, child. We know more than people think." She squeezed Emily's shoulder. "From now on, you stay where I can see you. There are safer places to collect and safer people to deal with." That night, Martha walked Emily to within a block of her apartment, watching until she was safely inside. Emily didn't see Martha pull out a small phone from beneath her layers of clothing, or hear her quiet conversation with someone about increasing patrols in the area. She also didn't notice the small notebook Martha consulted, where Joey Winter's details were written in precise handwriting, along with notes about his schedule and known associates. Nor did she see Martha make her way to the police station, where an anonymous tip about Joey's involvement in a string of local thefts would be filed the next morning. In her apartment, Emily added another X to her calendar, counting the dwindling days until her mother's next hospital visit. The night's events had shaken her, but they'd also shown her something important, that even in the darkest places, help could appear from unexpected sources. She fell asleep, clutching her father's journal, unaware that her encounter at the loading dock had set larger events in motion, or that Martha's intervention was more than just a homeless woman's random act of kindness. If this touching story of Emily's struggle moves your heart, please hit that like button. Every like helps us share these powerful stories of hope and resilience. Let's continue. The transformation of Martha's role in Emily's life happened gradually, like the changing of seasons. What began as chance encounters evolved into an intricate dance of protection and guidance. Martha established a network of invisible guardians, other homeless individuals who would signal when police cars approached or when suspicious characters entered their territory. "Remember, child," Martha would say, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "The streets have eyes, and tonight they're watching over you." She had strategically positioned her sleeping spot at different locations along Emily's regular route, though Emily never questioned how Martha always seemed to know where she'd be. Each night brought new lessons. Martha taught Emily how to differentiate between safe and dangerous situations, how to read people's intentions through their body language, and most importantly, how to protect herself without drawing attention. "Keep your head down," she'd instruct, "but your eyes up. Remember every exit. Trust your instincts, they're usually right." Their meetings developed a rhythm. Martha would share her evening meal, always surprisingly fresh and nutritious, while asking detailed questions about Emily's day, her mother's condition, and any interactions with Mrs. Peterson. She took mental notes of everything, though Emily never saw her write anything down in front of her. The other homeless people in the area began treating Emily differently under Martha's protection. Old Joe, who guarded the recycling center, would save the best cans for her. Miss Regina, who slept behind the library, kept an eye on Emily's apartment building during the day. Even Whistling Pete, known for his hostility toward other collectors, would warn Emily about aggressive dogs or troublemakers in the area. Martha's influence extended beyond just protection. She began leaving small care packages near Emily's regular spots: new socks, hand sanitizer, band-aids, and occasionally carefully wrapped sandwiches. These gifts always appeared when Emily needed them most, though Martha never acknowledged being their source. One particularly cold night, Martha produced a small pepper spray canister from her cart. "This isn't a toy," she explained, demonstrating proper handling with the precision of a self-defense instructor. "But it's a tool, and tools require responsibility." She spent an hour teaching Emily when and how to use it, making her promise to carry it only for emergencies. Their conversations grew deeper as trust built between them. Martha would share sanitized versions of street survival stories, each containing valuable lessons about safety and resilience. She never spoke of her own past, deflecting personal questions with practiced ease, but her knowledge of medicine, self-defense, and human nature hinted at a complex history. The change in Emily was subtle but significant. She walked with more confidence, made better decisions about which areas to avoid, and developed an almost sixth sense for dangerous situations. Martha's influence showed in other ways too. Emily's grades improved as Martha helped her establish a better study routine, insisting that education was her ticket to a better future. What Emily didn't know was that Martha spent her days gathering information about Mrs. Peterson's fraudulent activities, building a case file that grew thicker by the week. She maintained surveillance on the hospital, noting Mr. Thompson's comings and goings, and cultivating sources among the cleaning staff who kept her informed about Sarah's condition. Martha's shopping cart, which seemed to contain only survival basics, held a burner phone used to make anonymous tips to authorities about various neighborhood dangers. Her apparent homeless wandering masked careful patrols of Emily's regular routes, ensuring they remained safe for her nightly collections. The other homeless people who helped watch over Emily never questioned Martha's authority or her obvious difference from them. Something in her bearing, the way she planned and gave orders, suggested military or law enforcement training. But they respected her privacy, grateful for the stability her presence brought to their street community. One night, after ensuring Emily made it safely home, Martha stood in the shadows of the apartment building, watching the window until the light went out. She pulled out her notebook, making detailed entries about Emily's well-being, Mrs. Peterson's latest schemes, and potential threats in the area. The pages were filled with medical terminology, legal citations, and carefully organized evidence far from the ramblings of a homeless woman. As she closed the notebook, Martha touched the chain around her neck, where a hospital ID badge lay hidden beneath her layers of clothing. Her expression hardened as she thought about the growing threats to Emily's safety, knowing that soon she would have to reveal more of herself than she'd planned. But for now, she resumed her role as the seemingly harmless homeless woman, invisible to most but ever vigilant in her protection of one determined little girl. What began as Martha's solo mission of protection evolved into an intricate network of guardian angels living in society's shadows. The homeless community, often ignored by passers-by, transformed into an invisible security system with Emily at its center. Each member played a crucial role, their seemingly random movements actually carefully coordinated by Martha's quiet leadership. Old Joe, the veteran who lived behind the recycling center, became Emily's first line of defense during early evening hours. His military background showed in how he positioned himself at strategic points, using his battered radio to relay coded messages about suspicious activities. Weather's turning rough, he'd broadcast when police cars approached. Skies are clear meant Emily's path was safe. Miss Regina, a former librarian who'd lost everything in a house fire, maintained daytime surveillance. She'd position herself on the library steps with her cart of books, perfectly placed to monitor Emily's walk home from school. Her detailed reports to Martha included everything from Emily's eating habits to the condition of her clothes, enabling Martha to plan what supplies were needed most urgently. Whistling Pete, whose distinctive tune served as both warning and all-clear signal, organized other collectors to create safe zones during Emily's rounds. His network of informants tracked the movements of potential threats, aggressive security guards, predatory criminals, and even misses. Peterson's occasional drive-bys in her new car. The community's combined efforts created invisible corridors of safety through the city's most dangerous areas. They developed a sophisticated communication system using seemingly random gestures and movements. A newspaper held at a certain angle meant proceed with caution. A shopping cart positioned diagonally across an alley signaled find another route. Sarah's Angels, as they called themselves in private, extended their protection beyond just Emily's nightly collections. They monitored the hospital entrance, tracking Mr. Thompson's schedule and noting which board members visited. The cleaning staff, sympathetic to their cause, began leaving notes about Sarah's condition in predetermined locations. Doc, a former medical resident who'd lost his license to addiction but was now 5 years sober, provided valuable insights into Sarah's treatment options. His knowledge of hospital procedures and medications helped Martha understand the medical reports they managed to obtain. He maintained a small clinic in an abandoned storage unit, where he treated minor injuries and provided basic medical care to the community while keeping watch over their young charge. The network grew to include Speedy, a teenager who knew every shortcut in the city, who could deliver messages between lookouts faster than any phone. Sister Mary Catherine, who ran the local soup kitchen, became their intelligence hub, gathering information from other homeless individuals who passed through her doors. Each member of this underground network had their own story of loss and redemption, finding purpose in protecting this one determined child. They shared their food with Emily, taught her street wisdom, and maintained silent vigils outside her apartment building during storms or particularly cold nights. The coordination of their efforts would have impressed any military strategist. Hand signals, positioned objects, and carefully timed movements created a complex language understood only by those in the know. A coffee cup placed upside down on a specific corner meant safe passage. A broken piece of chalk marking an X warned of danger ahead. What made their operation remarkable was its invisibility to the outside world. To casual observers, they remained society's discards, the people others crossed the street to avoid. This anonymity became their greatest asset, allowing them to observe and protect without drawing attention. Martha orchestrated it all with subtle precision, assigning roles based on each person's strengths and past experiences. Former security guards became lookouts. Ex-teachers helped monitor Emily's educational progress, and those with medical knowledge kept track of signs that might indicate health issues needing attention. The network extended its influence into unexpected places. A sympathetic janitor at Emily's school began leaving notes about her welfare in predetermined locations. A night clerk at the convenience store would signal if he spotted suspicious vehicles in the area. Even the local beat cops, touched by the community's dedication, began turning a blind eye to their carefully organized surveillance activities. This underground support system provided more than just physical protection. It gave Emily an invisible family, each member contributing in their own way to her survival and well-being. They celebrated her small victories, mourned her setbacks, and maintained hope when circumstances seemed darkest. As winter approached, bringing new challenges and dangers, the network tightened its protective circle around Emily. Martha's careful planning ensured that every route had multiple backups, every danger had countermeasures, and every member knew their role in keeping one brave little girl safe as she fought her own battle to save her mother. The black Mercedes-Benz S-Class seemed out of place in the deteriorating neighborhood, its polished surface reflecting the flickering streetlights like a dark mirror. Robert Maxwell sat in the back seat, his Italian suit pristine despite the late hour, watching through tinted windows as Emily made her nightly rounds. His driver Thompson maintained a discreet distance, but their presence had not gone unnoticed by Martha's network of observers. "Another collection route?" Maxwell asked, his voice carrying the refined accent of old money and private schools. He studied the file open on his leather briefcase. "Emily Bennett, age 6. Mother Sarah Bennett, stage I breast cancer patient at St. Michael's. His manicured fingers traced the edge of a photograph Sarah and Emily at a park, taken years ago when smiles came easier. Maxwell had built his fortune on calculating risks and recognizing opportunities, but something about this situation felt different. He'd been tracking Emily's movements for 3 nights now, watching her methodical approach to can collection, noting her interaction with the homeless community that seemed to materialize and vanish around her like urban ghosts. What truly caught his attention was Martha. Through his extensive network of contacts, he'd learned fragments of her story, former head nurse at St. Michael's, respected trauma specialist, until a tragic incident involving her own daughter led to her disappearance from professional life. Now she orchestrated an invisible support system for a child who reminded her too much of her lost Katie. Sir Thompson interrupted his thoughts. The hospital administrator sent the latest reports. The Bennett account is severely delinquent. They're planning to transfer her to the state facility by week's end. Maxwell nodded, his expression unreadable. He'd built his reputation on tough business decisions, on knowing when to invest and when to walk away. But as he watched Emily carefully sorting cans in the dim light, something stirred in his memory, a promise made years ago to a young man who once worked as his driver. James Bennett was more than just my employee, Maxwell spoke softly, almost to himself. He saved my life that night on the icy road, and it cost him his own. His hand unconsciously touched his chest, where a scar reminded him of the accident that had taken James's life. I made him a promise as he lay there in the snow. I promised I'd look after his family. But he'd lost track of them after the funeral. Sarah had moved away, too proud to accept his offers of help, determined to make it on her own. Now fate had brought them back into his orbit, through a 6-year-old girl collecting cans in the darkness. Maxwell straightened his tie, a habit from countless boardroom confrontations. Contact our legal team. I want options on my desk by morning, and get me everything you can find on Victoria Peterson's fundraising activities. His tone shifted, becoming the one that had earned him the nickname the Shark in business circles. As the Mercedes pulled away from the curb, Martha emerged from the shadows, her keen eyes following the disappearing taillights. She'd recognized Maxwell immediately. His picture had appeared often enough in the business sections she still read during her quiet hours. What she couldn't determine was whether his arrival represented hope or a new threat to her young charge. That night, Maxwell sat in his penthouse office, surrounded by the glittering cityscape below. The Bennett file lay open on his desk, alongside reports of Mrs. Peterson's fraudulent activities and Martha's remarkable transformation from respected medical professional to homeless guardian angel. The pieces of a complex puzzle were falling into place. So his assistant's voice came through the intercom. The hospital board can be assembled for an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Good, Maxwell replied, his decision made. And Sarah Bennett's medical records. Dr. Morrison has agreed to discuss her case, within legal bounds, of course. Maxwell stood at his window, watching the city lights flicker like the candles in a cathedral. In his world of hostile takeovers and million-dollar deals, problems could usually be solved with money and influence. But this situation required a more delicate touch. Emily's determination, Martha's dedication, and his own unmet promise to James had created a web of obligations that transcended simple financial solutions. He picked up a framed photograph from his desk, himself and James Bennett at a company picnic, both younger, both laughing. "I let you down once, old friend," he murmured. "I won't do it again." As dawn approached, Maxwell began making calls, setting in motion events that would change multiple lives. But even he, with all his resources and influence, couldn't predict how his intervention would intersect with Martha's carefully laid plans or the ripple effects it would create through the lives of everyone involved. The morning light barely penetrated the tinted windows of Mr. Thompson's corner office at St. Michael's Memorial Hospital. He stood behind his mahogany desk, examining Sarah Bennett's file with cold calculation. The wall behind him displayed his numerous achievements diplomas, awards, recognition for cost-cutting measures that had saved the hospital millions. None of them captured the human cost of his efficiency. "Miss Anderson," he spoke into the intercom, "bring me the latest payment records for room 417. His voice carried the artificial warmth of someone who had practiced appearing human without quite mastering it. The young assistant hurried in, placing a folder on his desk before quickly retreating, like prey escaping a predator's den. Thompson's thin lips curved into a frown as he reviewed the numbers. Sarah Bennett's outstanding balance had grown to nearly $200,000. His quarterly bonus depended on reducing the hospital's uncollected debts, and this case had become a personal irritant. The board meeting was approaching, and he needed to show results. Straightening his perfectly pressed suit, Thompson made his way to Sarah's room. His footsteps echoed through the corridor like a metronome counting down the moments until his next act of calculated cruelty. 2 security guards, newly hired and eager to prove themselves, flanked him like well-trained dogs. "Mrs. Bennett," he announced, entering without knocking. "I trust you've had time to consider your situation." The room's atmosphere immediately chilled, as if his presence somehow lowered the temperature. Sarah, pale against her pillows, clutched her blanket tighter. Dr. Morrison, who had been checking Sarah's vitals, straightened up, her face hardening. "Mr. Thompson, my patient needs rest. This can wait." "No, doctor, it cannot." Thompson's voice cut through the air like a scalpel. "The hospital's patience, like Mrs. Bennett's credit, has run out." He placed a new document on the bedside table. "This is a transfer order to the state facility. Either sign it voluntarily or we'll proceed with involuntary discharge." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the paper. "Please," she whispered, "my daughter. She's so young. The state facility is too far." "Your daughter," Thompson interrupted, his voice dripping with manufactured concern, "should have been your priority before accepting treatment you couldn't afford. Consider this a lesson in fiscal responsibility." He checked his gold watch, a gesture designed to emphasize the value of his time. "You have until tomorrow morning to make arrangements." Dr. Morrison stepped between them, her white coat like armor. "This is medically unsound. Sarah's responding to treatment. Moving her now could." Could what? Thompson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Cost the hospital more money? Affect our statistics? Your bleeding heart, doctor, is becoming a liability to this institution." He turned to the security guards. "Ensure Mrs. Bennett doesn't leave the premises until the transfer is arranged. We wouldn't want to lose track of our investment." As he turned to leave, Dr. Morrison called out, "The board will hear about this, James." Thompson paused at the door. "The board. They approved this measure this morning. Times are changing, Rebecca. Adapt or find another hospital to bankrupt with your charity cases." His words hung in the air like poison gas. Back in his office, Thompson reviewed his next moves. The Bennett case had become symbolic of his new policies, a testament to his commitment to the hospital's financial health over what he dismissed as emotional considerations. He'd already arranged for photographers to document the transfer, planning to use it as evidence of his tough stance on delinquent accounts. His computer chimed with a new email. Opening it, his face darkened. Robert Maxwell's office had requested a meeting about the Bennett case. Maxwell's reputation preceded him. The businessman had significant influence with the hospital board. Thompson began calculating, weighing options, considering angles. The intercom buzzed again. "Sir, there's a woman here about Mrs. Bennett's case. She says she's from the state medical board." Thompson straightened his tie, preparing his practice smile. He'd dealt with oversight committees before, had mastered the art of presenting unfortunate necessities as sound business decisions. Yet something about this case nagged at him, like a surgical stitch pulled too tight. Staring out his window at the hospital parking lot, he spotted Emily collecting cans near the hospital dumpsters. His lip curled in disgust. The girl's presence had become a visible reminder of what he saw as the hospital's weakness, its occasional surrender to sentiment over sense. He picked up his phone, dialing security. Remove that vagrant child from the premises, and if she returns, call the police. His voice carried the finality of someone accustomed to having his orders obeyed without question. As darkness fell over St. Michael's, Thompson remained in his office, orchestrating what he saw as the necessary purge of institutional inefficiency. The Bennett case would set a precedent, showing other patients that St. Michael's was no longer a haven for those who couldn't pay their way. What Thompson didn't realize was that his actions had set in motion forces beyond his control, forces that would soon converge to challenge not just his authority, but the very system he had helped create. As he sat in his leather chair, plotting tomorrow's cruelties, he remained unaware that he had created not just enemies, but a resistance that would ultimately lead to his own undoing. The truth about Victoria Peterson's deception unraveled on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, when a newspaper reporter named Michael Crawford decided to follow up on what seemed like a heartwarming story of community support. What he discovered instead was a web of lies that would shock the entire city. Crawford sat in his cramped office at the Daily Chronicle, spreading out documents across his desk. Bank statements, social media posts, and donation records painted a disturbing picture. The GoFundMe account misses. Peterson had set up for Emily, had raised over $43,000, but not a single penny had reached the Bennett family. Instead, the money trail led to casino withdrawals, luxury purchases, and a recently acquired townhouse in the city's affluent district. "Look at this," Crawford muttered to his editor, sliding over a stack of receipts. Designer clothes, spa treatments, weekend trips to Vegas, all while that little girl is collecting cans at midnight. The evidence was damning: fake medical bills, forged signatures, and elaborate stories posted online to attract more donations. Mrs. Peterson had crafted her fraud with chilling precision. She'd created multiple social media accounts documenting her selfless dedication to Emily's care, complete with carefully staged photos and heart-wrenching updates about Sarah's condition. Each post was calculated to maximize sympathy and donations. The investigation revealed darker aspects of her scheme. She'd intercepted care packages from church groups, resold donated items online, and even used Emily's story to secure grants from local charities. The money intended for Emily's school supplies had funded Peterson's gambling habit at the Golden Eagle Casino. But here's where it gets worse, Crawford explained, pulling up surveillance footage from the casino. She's been using Emily's situation to network with wealthy donors, hosting fundraising events where she's the star attraction. The community thinks she's a saint, but she's nothing but a con artist in designer clothes. The paper trail showed Peterson's methodical approach to exploitation. She'd created a fake nonprofit organization, complete with forged documentation and a board of directors that didn't exist. Local businesses had donated thousands in goods and services, believing they were helping a sick mother and her devoted caretaker. As Crawford dug deeper, he discovered Peterson's history of similar schemes in other cities. Under different names, she'd exploited other families in crisis, always disappearing just before her frauds were exposed. The pattern was clear: find a vulnerable family, gain their trust, and milk their tragedy for every possible dollar. The scope of her deception became apparent in her detailed record-keeping. Peterson maintained spreadsheets tracking donation sources, potential marks, and even schedules of when to post particularly emotional updates for maximum impact. She'd turned Emily's tragedy into a profitable business model. Most disturbing were the text messages recovered from Peterson's phone revealing her casual cruelty. "Little brat better look sad in these photos," one message read. "Donors love a crying child." She'd coordinated with accomplices to stage scenes of her apparent generosity, all while Emily went hungry in an empty apartment. The fraud extended into the hospital administration. Peterson had convinced several staff members to provide her with confidential medical information, which she then manipulated for her online narratives. She'd even forged Dr. Morrison's signature on letters appealing for donations. Crawford found evidence of Peterson's luxury lifestyle hidden behind a facade of humble service. Credit card statements showed spa treatments, expensive restaurants, and shopping sprees at high-end boutiques, all funded by money meant for Emily's care. The contrast between her private indulgence and public persona of sacrifice was stark. "She's been living like a queen," Crawford's photographer commented, showing him pictures of Peterson's new townhouse, while that kid's been eating peanut butter sandwiches and sleeping on a mattress on the floor. The investigation uncovered a network of enablers, people who had either been fooled by Peterson's act or had actively participated in her schemes. Some had received kickbacks for their silence, while others had been manipulated by her skilled emotional manipulation. As Crawford prepared to publish his findings, he received an anonymous envelope containing additional evidence, surveillance photos of Peterson meeting with known fraudsters, audio recordings of her bragging about her schemes, and copies of falsified documents she'd used to secure donations. The reporter sat back in his chair, looking at the wall where he'd pinned the key pieces of evidence. The story had moved beyond simple fraud. It had become a testament to how easily society's protective systems could be corrupted by someone who knew how to exploit them. "We need to run this story now," his editor insisted, reviewing the final draft, "before she can disappear again, before she can hurt another family." Crawford nodded, but his thoughts were with Emily, still out there collecting cans, unaware that her supposed guardian had turned her suffering into a profitable enterprise. The story would expose Peterson's crimes, but it would also force Emily and Sarah to confront a betrayal that went beyond mere theft. It was a betrayal of trust, of hope, and of basic human decency. The article was set to run in tomorrow's paper. As Crawford made his final edits, he couldn't help but wonder about the ripple effects his expose would create. Peterson's fraud had touched so many lives, created so many victims. The truth would bring justice, but it would also bring pain to those who had believed in her lies. The truth about Martha Williams emerged not in a sudden revelation, but in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror slowly being reassembled. Each shard reflected a different aspect of a life marked by triumph, tragedy, and an unwavering dedication to healing others. Archive footage from St. Michael's Memorial Hospital's 15th anniversary gala showed a different Martha. Dr. Martha Williams, head of emergency medicine, accepting an award for excellence in trauma care. Her hair was styled elegantly, her posture confident, her speech inspiring as she discussed the importance of compassionate healthcare. The date stamp read 5 years ago, but it might as well have been from another lifetime. The hospital records told part of the story. Dr. Williams had been a pioneering trauma surgeon, known for taking on the most challenging cases. Her innovative protocols for emergency pediatric care had been adopted by hospitals across the country. Colleagues described her as brilliant, dedicated, and fiercely protective of her patients, especially children. Then came the night that changed everything. Her daughter Katie, just 7 years old, was brought into her own ER after a hit and run. The security footage showed Martha working desperately to save her child's life, refusing to step aside even as colleagues begged her to let others take over. For 6 hours she fought against the inevitable, her surgical skills warring with a mother's denial. Katie didn't survive the night. The official report cited multiple trauma complications, but those who were there remembered something else the moment Martha Williams died alongside her daughter, even though her body continued to move through the world. The following months were a blur of investigations and recriminations. The driver was never found. The hospital board, concerned about liability, suggested a leave of absence. Martha resigned instead, disappearing so completely that even her closest friends couldn't find her. What few knew was that Martha had transformed her grief into purpose. She used her savings to create an underground network of medical care for the homeless operating from abandoned buildings and forgotten spaces. Her medical license may have lapsed, but her knowledge and skill remained intact. A former colleague, speaking anonymously, revealed Martha didn't just disappear, she chose invisibility as a tactical advantage. Living on the streets gave her access to information and people that no one else could reach. She became a guardian angel for those the system had failed. The breadth of her continued influence became apparent in the detailed notebooks found in her shopping cart. Each contained meticulously documented cases, children at risk, families in crisis, medical emergencies handled in the shadows. Her handwriting, still precise and clinical, recorded not just medical details but also the human stories behind each case. Most surprising was the discovery of her ongoing connection to the medical community. Several hospital staff members regularly passed her information about patients in need, while pharmacists quietly filled prescriptions she wrote under her old credentials. She had created a parallel healthcare system for those who had fallen through the cracks of the official one. The tragic irony wasn't lost on those who knew her story. The woman who had once commanded a state-of-the-art emergency department now performed minor surgeries in abandoned buildings, using supplies sourced through an underground network of sympathetic medical professionals. Her surveillance of Emily wasn't just protective, it was personal. In Emily, Martha saw echoes of Katie, the same age, the same determination, the same vulnerability in a world too often indifferent to children's suffering. But where she had failed to save her daughter, she was determined to save Emily. The extent of Martha's preparation became clear in her hidden storage unit. Among carefully organized medical supplies and case files was a complete dossier on the Bennett case, Sarah's medical records, Emily's school reports, detailed documentation of Mrs. Peterson's fraud, and surveillance photos of Mr. Thompson's suspicious activities. More telling were the letters, dozens of them, never sent, written to Katie, describing the children she'd helped, the lives she'd touched, the purpose she'd found in her pain. Each letter ended the same way: "I'm trying to be the mother you always believed I could be." Former patients from her hospital days, learning of her new life, shared stories of her extraordinary compassion. Even in her darkest moments, they said, she had never lost her fundamental drive to heal, to protect, to make the world slightly less cruel for those most vulnerable to its harshness. As the pieces of Martha's past came together, they revealed not just a story of loss but one of transformation. She had turned her personal tragedy into a mission, her medical expertise into a shield for the defenseless, her pain into purpose. Yet she continued her vigil on the streets, her identity known only to those who needed her most. To the outside world, she remained just another homeless woman, invisible and ignored. But to those who knew the truth, she was a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of healing come from those who have been most deeply wounded. The evening started like any other, with Emily making her rounds through the familiar alleyways. But tonight was different. The usual street sounds seemed muted, and the shadows held a menacing quality that made her skin prickle. Martha's network had been unusually active, their signals more urgent, their movements more frequent. Two men had been following Emily for the past 3 blocks, maintaining enough distance to avoid immediate suspicion but close enough to track her movements. They weren't the usual neighborhood threats, their clothes were too new, their movements too practiced. These were Mrs. Peterson's people, sent to silence the growing whispers about her fraudulent activities. "Hey kid," the first man called out, his friendly tone masking something darker. "Mrs. Peterson sent us to pick you up. Says there's some paperwork about your mom she needs you to see." He took a step forward, hands casually tucked into his jacket pockets. His partner moved to block the alley's exit. Emily's heart raced as she remembered Martha's warnings about strangers claiming to know her situation. The pepper spray felt heavy in her pocket, but the men were too close for her to reach it without being noticed. She clutched her bag of cans closer, buying time as she scanned for escape routes. "Mrs. Peterson doesn't come around anymore," Emily replied, her voice steady despite her fear. She took a small step backward, remembering Martha's lessons about maintaining distance. The first man's smile tightened, becoming predatory. "Don't be difficult, kid. There's been some confusion about the donations for your mom. Mrs. Peterson just wants to clear things up." He reached for her arm, but Emily was already moving, ducking under his grasp and darting toward a narrow gap between dumpsters. The chase began in earnest. Emily's small size became her advantage as she squeezed through spaces too tight for her pursuers. She could hear them cursing behind her, their footsteps echoing off brick walls. The can collection bag slowed her down, but she refused to drop it. Those cans meant medicine for her mother. Whistling Pete's distinctive signal cut through the night, warning others of the danger. Emily saw shadows moving in her peripheral vision, Martha's network mobilizing. Old Joe appeared at the end of an alley, his shopping cart strategically positioned to block the path of one pursuer. Miss Regina's voice carried clearly from the darkness, appearing to come from multiple directions. "The police are on their way." But the men were persistent, and they were gaining ground. Emily's lungs burned as she ran, her feet carrying her through a maze of back streets and service corridors. She could hear one of them talking on a phone, the kids causing problems. "Yeah, she knows too much. Mrs. Peterson wants this handled tonight." Just as Emily's strength was failing, a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows. Martha stood in the middle of the alley, no longer stooped or seemingly frail. Her posture was straight, her bearing almost military. The shopping cart that usually held her possessions now formed a barrier across the narrow passage. "That's far enough." Martha's voice carried the authority of her former position. "Emily, come here." The girl didn't hesitate, running to Martha's side. The two men slowed but didn't stop, their confidence boosted by the sight of what appeared to be just another homeless woman. "This doesn't concern you, lady," the first man growled. "Walk away and you won't get hurt." Martha's laugh was cold and sharp as broken glass. "Theodore Martinez and James Cooper," she said, making both men freeze, both hired by Victoria Peterson last week, both with outstanding warrants in Nevada. She pulled out a phone, not a homeless person's burner phone, but a high-end model. "Smile for the camera, gentlemen. My friends at the FB, I will appreciate the update." The men's expressions shifted from confidence to uncertainty. Martha continued, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The evidence of Peterson's fraud has already been documented. The only question is whether you want to be charged as accomplices or turn state's witness." But for a moment, no one moved. Then old Joe emerged from one side of the alley, whistling Pete from the other. More figures appeared on fire escapes, and behind dumpsters Martha's network, forming a human wall between Emily and her pursuers. "Your choice, gentlemen," Martha stated flatly. "The police are 3 minutes away. I suggest you use that time wisely." The men exchanged glances, then turned and ran, disappearing into the maze of city streets. Once they were gone, Martha's transformation was immediate. She knelt beside Emily, checking her for injuries with the practiced hands of a doctor. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" Her voice was gentle now, filled with concern. Emily shook her head, still trembling from the adrenaline. "They said Mrs. Peterson sent them." "About the donations," Martha's expression hardened for a moment before she forced it back to calmness. "Listen carefully," Martha said, holding Emily's shoulders. "You're not safe at your apartment tonight. Mrs. Peterson knows where you live." She gestured to Miss Regina, who appeared with a small backpack. "We've prepared for this. You'll stay somewhere safe until this is over." That night, Emily found herself in a surprising sanctuary, a small but clean room above Sister Mary Catherine's soup kitchen. As Martha stood watch by the window, Emily finally asked the question that had been building all evening: "Who are you really?" Martha was quiet for a long moment before answering. Someone who couldn't save her own daughter, but who won't fail to save another. She turned to Emily, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and pain. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we end this." As Emily drifted off to sleep, Martha's network continued their vigil throughout the city. They tracked Peterson's accomplices, documented their movements, and strengthened the protective circle around their young charge. The night's events had forced Martha's hand. The time for shadows and secrets was ending. The revelation of Martha's true identity unfolded in St. Michael's Memorial Hospital's boardroom during an emergency meeting called to address the Bennett case. Mr. Thompson stood at the head of the table, halfway through his practice speech about fiscal responsibility, when the boardroom doors opened. Martha Williams walked in, but not as the homeless woman the streets knew. She wore a crisp business suit, her silver hair neatly styled, her bearing that of someone accustomed to commanding rooms far more impressive than this one. The transformation was so complete that even Thompson took a step back, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Dr. Martha Williams," she announced, her voice carrying the authority that had once made her legendary in the hospital's trauma unit, former head of emergency medicine at this institution and current advocate for Sarah and Emily Bennett. She placed a thick folder on the boardroom table with surgical precision. The board members erupted in whispers. Many remembered her the brilliant trauma surgeon whose innovative protocols had put St. Michael's on the map, whose tragic loss of her daughter had become hospital legend, whose disappearance had spawned countless rumors. 5 years ago, Martha continued, silencing the room with her presence, "My daughter Katie died in this hospital's emergency room. I couldn't save her. But what truly killed her wasn't just the accident, it was a system that prioritizes profit over people, that turns healing into a commodity." She opened the folder, spreading out documents with methodical care. "Since then, I've been watching. Living on the streets gave me perfect cover to document every instance of patient neglect, every ethical breach, every decision that placed profit above care." Her eyes locked onto Thompson, who had begun to fidget with his tie. The evidence was damning. Martha had compiled years of documentation: patients discharged prematurely, treatments denied based on financial status, charitable donations misappropriated. Each case was meticulously detailed, supported by records that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of hospital operations. But the Bennett case, Martha's voice softened slightly, represents everything wrong with what this institution has become. A young mother denied proper care because of finances. A 6-year-old child forced to collect cans at night, while this hospital's administration enjoys catered lunches and bonus packages. She produced more documents: photographs of Emily's nighttime collection routes, records of Mrs. Peterson's fraud, evidence of Thompson's knowledge and tacit approval of the situation. The board members passed the papers among themselves, faces growing increasingly grave. "I didn't choose to live on the streets," Martha continued, her composure absolute. "I chose to become invisible to expose the truth. Every night I watched that little girl fight for her mother's life, I saw my Katie. Every time this hospital prioritized profits over patient care, I documented it. Every instance of corruption, every ethical breach, it's all here." Dr. Morrison, sitting among the board members, wiped tears from her eyes. She had been one of the doctors trying to save Katie that night, had witnessed Martha's descent into grief, had never suspected that her old friend had transformed her pain into such purposeful action. "You're no longer employed here," Dr. Williams Thompson tried to regain control. "These allegations are being reviewed by the State Medical Board." Martha cut him off. "And the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Division. My position here is irrelevant. What matters is the evidence." She pulled out one final document, including evidence of your personal involvement in redirecting charitable donations meant for patient care into administrative bonuses. The room fell silent. Martha stood straight, every inch the respected surgeon she had once been, her years on the street falling away like a discarded disguise. "I lost my daughter. I lost my career. I lost everything that defined me. But I found a new purpose: ensuring that no other child loses a parent, because this hospital values its profit margins more than its patients." The board chairman, an elderly doctor who had known Martha in her previous life, spoke first. "What are your demands, Dr. Williams?" Martha's response was immediate. Full treatment for Sarah Bennett, funded by the hospital's charitable care program. A complete audit of all patient care decisions made under Mr. Thompson's administration, and the establishment of a proper charitable care foundation with transparent oversight and dedicated funding. She pulled out one final photograph Emily sorting cans under a streetlight. "This ends now. No more children sacrificing their childhood because this hospital has forgotten its mission to heal." The transformation was complete. The homeless woman who had watched over Emily had become Dr. Martha Williams again, but changed, tempered by grief, strengthened by purpose, driven by a determination to protect those the system had failed. As the board moved to deliberate, Martha remained standing, a guardian angel in business attire, her years of invisible vigilance finally bearing fruit. Her revelation wasn't just about exposing corruption, it was about reclaiming her power to heal, to protect, to make change happen. The street network she had built would continue its work, but now with her operating in the light, using her restored credentials and authority to bridge the gap between society's margins and its centers of power. She had turned her tragedy into triumph, her pain into purpose, her loss into a legacy that would help countless others. The revelation about Robert Maxwell's connection to the Bennett family came during the most dramatic moment of the hospital board meeting. Just as Martha finished her presentation, Maxwell stepped into the boardroom, his presence commanding immediate attention. But it wasn't his business reputation that silenced the room, it was the photograph he placed on the table. "James Bennett wasn't just my driver," Maxwell announced, his voice carrying an unfamiliar strain of emotion. "He was the man who gave his life saving mine." The photograph showed a younger Maxwell standing beside James Bennett at a company picnic, both men smiling, James's arm thrown casually over his boss's shoulder in a gesture that suggested their relationship transcended mere employment. 3 years ago, on a snowy night outside the city, Maxwell continued, his usual corporate polish cracking slightly, James saw the truck that had lost control on the ice. He had seconds to make a decision. Maxwell's hand unconsciously touched his chest where surgical scars lay hidden beneath his expensive suit. He turned the wheel, putting our car between me and the oncoming truck. The impact killed him instantly. The board members sat in stunned silence as Maxwell produced another photograph, this one showing Emily as a toddler, perched on James's shoulders at a company Christmas party. I made him a promise that night, as he lay there in the snow. I swore I'd look after his family. Maxwell's voice hardened with self-recrimination. But Sarah was proud. She refused my help, moved away, determined to make it on her own. I respected her wishes, a decision I've regretted every day since. He turned to Martha, recognition passing between them, until I saw a little girl collecting cans in the darkness and recognized James's determination in her eyes. The story spilled out how Maxwell had spent years trying to track down Sarah and Emily, how his investigators had finally located them only after Sarah's admission to St. Michael's, how he had watched from a distance as Emily carried out her nightly missions of mercy. "I failed James once," Maxwell declared, fixing Thompson with a stare that had made corporate rivals quake. "I won't fail his daughter." He pulled out a document bearing his company's letterhead. "As of this morning, I've purchased the majority of St. Michael's outstanding debt. This hospital's financial decisions now require my approval." Thompson's face went pale. Maxwell continued, "And my first decision is this: every cent this hospital has earned through denying care, through pushing patients to state facilities, through prioritizing profits over people, all of it will go into a new charitable care foundation." He glanced at Martha, with Dr. Williams as its director. The connection between James Bennett's sacrifice and Emily's current struggle cast everything in a new light. Maxwell's wealth and influence, combined with Martha's street-level intelligence and medical expertise, created a formidable force for change. "James used to tell me about his daughter," Maxwell shared, his voice softening. "How she would wait up for him when he worked late, how she would leave him little drawings in his lunchbox, how she had his same stubborn determination to help others. He looked around the boardroom. That little girl is out there right now, collecting cans to save her mother, while we sit in this air-conditioned room discussing profit margins. The weight of responsibility and redemption hung heavy in Maxwell's words. He had found a way to honor both his debt to James and his own conscience, turning his wealth into a tool for systemic change rather than just individual charity. The foundation will bear James Bennett's name, Maxwell announced, and its first action will be to ensure that no child in this city ever has to collect cans to save their parents' life, he turned to Martha. Dr. Williams has shown us how far the system has fallen. Now it's time to rebuild it properly. As the board meeting concluded, Maxwell and Martha shared a moment of understanding. They had each found their way to Emily through different paths of loss and redemption, Martha through her daughter's death, Maxwell through James's sacrifice. Together, they represented a powerful combination of street-level compassion and corporate influence, united in their determination to protect one little girl and change the system that had failed her. The truth about James Bennett's heroism and Maxwell's promise would eventually be shared with Emily and Sarah, but for now the focus remained on ensuring their immediate safety and care. The long-hidden connection between a wealthy businessman and a dedicated driver had set in motion changes that would ripple far beyond one family story. As this story touches your heart, we invite you to become part of our storytelling family. By subscribing to our channel, you help us continue sharing these powerful narratives of hope, courage, and humanity. Every subscription means another chance to spread stories that matter. Join us on this journey. The transformation in Sarah Bennett's treatment began immediately after the hospital board meeting. The sterile confines of room 417 buzzed with a new energy as doctor. Morrison, now unfettered by financial constraints, implemented an aggressive treatment protocol that had previously been deemed too expensive. The latest scans show promising results, Dr. Morrison explained to Sarah, her eyes bright with cautious optimism. The images on the lightbox revealed what months of proper treatment could achieve: tumor margins shrinking, lymph nodes returning to normal size. With the new targeted therapy we've started, combined with immunotherapy, your chances have increased significantly. Sarah lay in her hospital bed, color gradually returning to her cheeks. The experimental treatment that had been out of reach due to cost was now part of her daily regimen. Each bag of medicine that dripped into her veins represented hope, not just for survival, but for a future with her daughter. "What are the numbers?" Sarah asked, her voice stronger than it had been in months. She had learned to read the subtle expressions on her doctor's face to translate medical cautious into real possibilities. Dr. Morrison smiled, allowing herself to show real enthusiasm for the first time. "Your response to the new treatment protocol has been remarkable. The primary tumor has reduced by 40% in just 3 weeks. Your blood markers are trending in the right direction, if this continues." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We're looking at a 75% chance of complete remission." The statistics hung in the air like a prayer. 75% numbers that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago when Sarah faced transfer to the state facility. Now, supported by the full resources of St. Michael's and the newly established James Bennett Foundation, her treatment had become a model for what was possible when medicine focused on healing rather than profit. The daily updates showed steady improvement. Sarah's strength returned gradually, first sitting up without assistance, then short walks in the corridor, finally making it to the hospital garden where Emily could visit without the oppressive atmosphere of the hospital room. Each step forward was meticulously documented, not just for medical records but as evidence for the new protocols being established. "Your case is changing things," Dr. Morrison shared during one evening checkup. "The board has approved similar treatment plans for 3 other patients who were facing transfer. Your fight is opening doors for others." The physical changes were matched by emotional healing. Sarah no longer had to pretend strength for Emily's visits. She actually felt it returning. The dark circles under her eyes faded, replaced by a spark of real hope. Her hair, though still thin from treatment, had begun to grow back, a visible symbol of renewal. Weekly case conferences now included not just medical staff but also representatives from the James Bennett Foundation, ensuring that financial concerns would never again compromise patient care. Sarah's treatment became a blueprint for the hospital's new approach to complex cases: comprehensive, aggressive, and unburdened by artificial financial constraints. "We're not just treating the cancer," Dr. Morrison explained to her team. "We're treating the whole person, the whole family. Sarah's recovery is about more than medical metrics. It's about restoring a mother to her daughter, about proving that every patient deserves our best efforts." The recovery wasn't linear. There were still difficult days when the treatments left Sarah exhausted and nauseous, but now she had support, real support, not just medical but emotional and practical. The hospital's new family care coordinator ensured Emily had proper care and supervision, allowing Sarah to focus entirely on healing. As spring turned to summer, Sarah's prognosis continued to improve. The latest round of scans showed further tumor reduction, and her blood work approached normal ranges. Dr. Morrison began discussing longer-term plans: rehabilitation, gradual return to activity, even the possibility of returning to teaching. "You're not just surviving, Doctor," Morrison told her during one checkup. "You're showing us all what's possible when we remove artificial barriers to healing. Your recovery is becoming part of something bigger, a change in how we think about healthcare, about what's possible when we prioritize healing over profits." The city's response to Emily's story began as a ripple and swelled into a wave of change when the Daily Chronicle published Crawford's Expose, complete with photos of Emily's nighttime collections and details of Mrs. Peterson's fraud. The community's reaction was immediate and powerful. Local businesses that had been duped by Peterson's schemes redirected their support directly to the Bennett family. The owner of Joe's Diner, where Emily often searched for cans, started a legitimate fundraising campaign that spread across social media. "No child should have to dig through our trash to save their mother," his viral post declared, accompanied by security camera footage of Emily's nightly routine. The story touched a nerve in the community's conscience. Parents looked at their own children and imagined them in Emily's situation. Teachers from Patterson Elementary came forward with their observations: how Emily had maintained perfect attendance despite her circumstances, how she had never complained or sought special treatment, how she had even shared her lunch with other struggling students. "She would give away her sandwich even when we knew she had little food at home," Mrs. Thompson, her third-grade teacher, told the local news. "That level of compassion from a child who had every reason to think only of herself. It shames us adults who looked away for so long." The revelation of Martha's true identity added another layer to the story that captivated the public. The image of a renowned surgeon choosing to live on the streets to protect vulnerable children struck a chord. Medical students at the university began volunteer programs inspired by her example, providing basic health care to homeless communities. Churches and community organizations that had unwittingly supported Mrs. Peterson's fraud reorganized their efforts. The First Baptist Church converted its basement into an evening study center for children from struggling families. The Rotary Club established a medical assistance fund specifically for single parents facing catastrophic illness. Local law enforcement, embarrassed by their failure to notice a 6-year-old's nightly wanderings, implemented new training programs focused on recognizing and supporting vulnerable community members. Officer Sarah Jenkins, who had often patrolled the areas where Emily collected cans, spearheaded an initiative to bridge the gap between police and the homeless community. The City Council faced public pressure to address the systemic issues Emily's story had exposed. Emergency sessions were called to discuss healthcare access, child protection policies, and support systems for single parents. The mayor, facing re-election, announced a comprehensive review of social services and promised reforms. Emily's former classmates organized their own response. The Student Council at Patterson Elementary initiated a recycling program, with proceeds going to the newly established James Bennett Foundation. Children began asking their parents uncomfortable questions about inequality and social responsibility. My daughter asked me why we have 2 cars when Emily and her mum had none. One parent shared at a PTA meeting that evolved into a community action planning session. These kids understand something we adults have forgotten, that we're all responsible for each other. The homeless community that had protected Emily found itself suddenly visible in a new way. Their network of mutual support and protection, revealed through Emily's story, challenged public perceptions. Donations to homeless shelters increased, but more importantly, people began to see the humanity in those they had previously ignored. Local media outlets competed to follow up on different aspects of the story. A documentary filmmaker began interviewing members of Martha's network, revealing the hidden infrastructure of care that existed beneath the city's surface. Their stories of former professionals, caring mothers, and skilled workers who had fallen through society's cracks forced viewers to confront their prejudices. The response extended beyond charity to real systemic change. Business leaders, inspired by Robert Maxwell's example, began examining their own corporate policies. The Chamber of Commerce established a task force to explore how local businesses could better support employees facing medical crises. Even the city's physical landscape began to change. The alleyways where Emily had once collected cans were cleaned up and lit. The abandoned buildings that had sheltered Martha's underground medical clinic were renovated into a legitimate free healthcare center. The loading dock where Emily had faced danger became the site of a community garden. The story continued to resonate because it represented both failure and hope, the failure of society's safety nets and the hope represented by individuals who refused to accept that failure. Each new initiative, whether large or small, carried the same message: never again would a child in their city have to collect cans in the dark to save their parent's life. In the wake of her public revelation, Martha Williams faced a choice that would define the next chapter of both her life and her mission. Standing in her newly offered office at St. Michael's Memorial, the walls still bare except for her restored medical license, she contemplated the 2 paths before her. The hospital board, newly reconstituted under Maxwell's influence, had offered her not just reinstatement, but a position as Chief of Emergency Medicine. The role came with resources, authority, and the ability to implement changes she'd dreamed of during her years on the street. Yet Martha understood that accepting would mean leaving behind the network she'd built, the invisible system of care that had protected so many. "I won't abandon them," she announced during a private meeting with Maxwell and Dr. Morrison. "The streets taught me something that no medical school ever could. Sometimes healing happens in the shadows, where traditional medicine can't reach." Her solution was characteristically bold. She would decline the hospital position and instead direct the newly established James Bennett Foundation. The foundation would bridge the gap between traditional healthcare and street-level intervention, legitimizing and expanding the network she'd built during her years of self-imposed exile. "The hospital needs a chief of emergency medicine who can focus entirely on that role," Martha explained. "What our community needs is someone who can move between worlds, from boardrooms to back alleys, from clinical trials to soup kitchens." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had walked both paths. Using her restored credentials and newfound influence, Martha transformed her underground medical network into a legitimate mobile healthcare system. The shopping cart that had carried her medical supplies was replaced by fully equipped medical vans. The homeless individuals who had served as lookouts became trained community health workers. But Martha's most significant sacrifice came in how she chose to use her restored public identity. Rather than returning to her former life of professional prestige, she maintained her connections to the street community. She continued to spend nights in the areas where help was most needed, now operating openly but still living simply. Credibility on the streets isn't something you can earn from behind a desk, she explained to those who questioned her choice. Trust is built in shared struggle, in being present when people are most vulnerable. Her decision meant sacrificing comfort, status, and the traditional rewards of her medical expertise. The foundation's headquarters, established in a converted warehouse in the heart of the area she'd long protected, reflected her philosophy. The building combined state-of-the-art medical facilities with spaces designed to welcome those society often rejected. Her office remained Spartan, containing only what she needed to bridge the world she straddled. Martha's sacrifice extended to her personal life as well. When offered housing befitting her restored position, she chose instead to live in a small apartment above the foundation's clinic. "My work doesn't end when office hours are over," she would say. Healing doesn't follow a schedule. Her example inspired others. Medical students began requesting rotations at the Foundation's street clinics. Healthcare professionals volunteered their time. The network she'd built during her years of invisible service expanded, now operating in the open but maintaining its core mission of reaching those the system had failed. The hardest part was accepting that she couldn't save everyone, just as she hadn't been able to save Katie. But in choosing to remain connected to the street community while wielding institutional power, Martha created a new model of healthcare delivery, one that recognized the humanity in every patient, regardless of their circumstances. Each night, Martha would still walk her old routes, now wearing a white coat over simple clothes, carrying a medical bag instead of pushing a shopping cart. The respect she'd earned during her years on the street remained, deepened by the understanding that she'd chosen to stay connected to their world, even when given the option to leave it behind. Her sacrifice became a different kind of healing, not just for her patients or the community, but for herself. In choosing to remain between worlds, in sacrificing traditional success for continued service, Martha finally found peace with her inability to save her daughter. She had transformed her personal tragedy into a mission that would outlive her, creating a legacy of compassion that would continue to heal long after she was gone. The James Bennett Memorial Clinic rose from the ashes of the abandoned Wilson's Bakery, transforming a symbol of urban decay into a beacon of hope. The three-story building, with its restored brick facade and welcoming entrance, stood as a testament to the power of community transformation and dedicated purpose. Maxwell had insisted on state-of-the-art facilities, but Martha's influence ensured the clinic maintained a welcoming atmosphere for those accustomed to society's margins. The waiting room featured comfortable seating arranged in small clusters rather than institutional rows, walls adorned with local artwork, and a play area where Emily herself had helped choose the toys and books. "We're not just treating illnesses here," Martha explained during the opening ceremony. "We're healing the divide between traditional healthcare and community needs." The clinic's innovative design reflected this philosophy. Examination rooms equipped with the latest medical technology sat alongside community spaces where support groups and educational programs could gather. The staff was as carefully chosen as the facilities. Martha recruited medical professionals who understood the complexities of serving marginalized communities. Many came from backgrounds similar to their patients, bringing personal experience to their professional roles. The homeless individuals who had been part of Martha's network were hired and trained as community health workers, their street knowledge now complementing clinical expertise. The clinic's services extended far beyond traditional medical care. A legal aid office helped patients navigate insurance and disability claims. A social services department coordinated housing and employment assistance. The rooftop garden, tended by former can collectors now employed as maintenance staff, provided fresh produce for the clinic's nutrition program. Most importantly, the clinic operated on a 24-hour schedule, acknowledging that medical emergencies and healthcare needs didn't conform to standard business hours. The night shift held special significance. It was during these hours that Martha had first built her network of care, and now the clinic stood ready to serve those who could only seek help under cover of darkness. Sarah's recovery room, specially designed for long-term care patients, became a model for how medical spaces could promote healing through both treatment and environment. Large windows offered views of the city she and Emily had navigated alone for so long, while medical equipment was discreetly integrated to maintain a home-like atmosphere. The clinic's funding structure, developed through Maxwell's business acumen and Martha's insistence on accessibility, ensured that no patient would ever be turned away for financial reasons. A sliding-scale payment system, bolstered by the James Bennett Foundation's resources, made treatment available to all while maintaining the clinic's sustainability. A special wing was dedicated to pediatric care, named in memory of Katie Williams. Here, children from struggling families received not just medical attention but also educational support, nutritional guidance, and psychological counseling. Emily's experience had taught them that treating a child meant supporting the whole family. The clinic's impact extended beyond its walls. Mobile medical units, staffed by professionals and community health workers, reached those still unable or unwilling to come to a traditional facility. These units maintained the spirit of Martha's shopping cart clinics while providing a higher standard of care. As the clinic approached its first anniversary, the statistics told a compelling story: thousands of patients treated, hundreds of families supported, and dozens of lives saved through early intervention and comprehensive care. But the real measure of success could be seen in the faces of those who found hope within its walls, people who, like Emily and Sarah, had once thought themselves beyond help. The James Bennett Memorial Clinic became more than just a medical facility. It became a model for community-based healthcare, studied by medical schools and replicated in other cities. It stood as proof that when compassion met capability, when street wisdom merged with medical expertise, real change was possible. Sarah Bennett's transformation from patient to pioneer unfolded naturally as her strength returned. During her recovery at the James Bennett Memorial Clinic, she discovered a new purpose that combined her teaching background with her unique perspective as a survivor of both illness and systemic failure. Education isn't just about books and tests, she explained to Martha during one of their planning sessions. It's about teaching people to advocate for themselves, to understand their rights in the healthcare system. With this vision, Sarah developed the clinic's Patient Education and Advocacy Program, PEAP, a comprehensive initiative designed to empower patients with knowledge and support. The program began in the clinic's community room, where Sarah led weekly workshops for patients navigating complex medical decisions. Her approach was deeply personal, drawing from her own experience of struggling to understand treatment options while dealing with financial pressures. She had a particular gift for explaining medical terminology in accessible language, breaking down complex treatment protocols into manageable steps. Working closely with Martha and the medical staff, Sarah created educational materials that addressed not just health issues, but the entire ecosystem of challenges facing patients. The curriculum covered everything from understanding insurance paperwork to accessing social services, from managing medication schedules to communicating effectively with medical providers. Her most innovative contribution was the Navigator program, which paired experienced patients with those newly diagnosed with serious illnesses. These peer mentors, including Sarah herself, provided emotional support and practical guidance based on their own journeys through the healthcare system. The program proved especially valuable for single parents trying to balance treatment with family responsibilities. Emily became a regular presence at the clinic after school, doing her homework in Sarah's office and often helping younger children in the pediatric waiting area. The sight of mother and daughter working together, both healthy and purposeful, became a powerful symbol of hope for other families facing similar challenges. Sarah's role expanded to include training medical students and residents in patient communication. Her presentations about her experience as both a patient and a can collector's mother became mandatory parts of the clinic's orientation program. Understanding the human cost of healthcare inequality, she would tell them, is as important as understanding the medicine you'll practice. The weekly support group she led for parents with serious illnesses became known for its combination of practical advice and emotional sustenance. Sarah created a safe space where fears could be voiced, tears could fall, and hope could be rebuilt among people who truly understood each other's struggles. As her influence grew, Sarah was invited to speak at medical conferences and policy meetings, sharing her story and advocating for systemic changes. Her testimony about the impact of financial barriers to healthcare helped secure additional funding for community clinics and patient support programs throughout the state. But perhaps her most meaningful work happened in the quiet moments, sitting with a frightened mother newly diagnosed with cancer, helping a confused elderly patient understand his medication schedule, or simply being present as living proof that survival was possible. That hope had a place even in the darkest circumstances. Robert Maxwell's transformation from corporate titan to compassionate reformer manifested in both grand gestures and subtle changes. The man who had once measured success in profit margins now found himself evaluating his achievements by the number of lives improved through the James Bennett Foundation's work. In honor of his former driver's sacrifice, Maxwell restructured his entire corporate philosophy. He established mandatory healthcare coverage for all employees, including part-time workers, and created emergency assistance funds for employees facing medical crises. The policies he implemented at his companies became models for corporate responsibility in healthcare. James taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, Maxwell often remarked during board meetings, but in the lives we touch and the changes we enable. His office, once decorated with artwork and awards, now displayed photos of families helped by the foundation, with James and Emily Bennett's picture holding the central position. The transformation went beyond philanthropy. Maxwell became personally involved in the clinic's operations, regularly meeting with patients and staff to understand their needs better. He could often be found in the pediatric wing, reading to children or simply listening to their stories, his corporate persona softening in the presence of their unguarded honesty. His business acumen proved invaluable in expanding the clinic's impact. He leveraged his connections to create a network of corporate partners willing to provide jobs for patients recovering from serious illnesses. His negotiating skills helped secure better prices for medical supplies and equipment, making the clinic's model more sustainable and replicable. Most significantly, Maxwell established a scholarship fund in James Bennett's name, specifically designed to support children of single parents facing medical crises. The fund covered not just educational expenses but also living costs, ensuring that no child would have to choose between education and family obligations. Working closely with Martha and Sarah, Maxwell learned to see healthcare through the eyes of those who had struggled within the system. His public speeches began addressing the human cost of healthcare inequality, using his platform to advocate for systemic change rather than just charitable solutions. The business community initially viewed his transformation with skepticism, but as the positive impacts of his initiatives became clear, others began to follow his lead. Maxwell's example showed that corporate success and social responsibility could coexist, that profit and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. His redemption came not just through money spent, but through time invested, through personal growth, and through a fundamental shift in how he viewed his role in society. The promise he had made to James in those final moments on a snowy road had led him to a deeper understanding of wealth's true purpose. The man who had once inhabited only boardrooms and luxury offices now moved comfortably between worlds, equally at ease discussing budget allocations with hospital administrators and sitting with families in the clinic's waiting room. His redemption was found not in grand gestures but in the daily work of turning resources into hope, profits into possibilities, and promises into reality. 10 years after her nights collecting cans, Emily Bennett stood at the podium of her high school graduation as valedictorian, her story inspiring a new generation. The small girl who had once navigated dark alleys had grown into a poised young woman, carrying both the wisdom of her experiences and the determination to create change. "Our challenges don't define us," she told her classmates, her mother Sarah and Martha beaming proudly in the audience. "They prepare us to help others facing similar struggles." Her speech wove together personal history and future vision, announcing her acceptance to medical school and her commitment to continuing the work begun at the James Bennett Memorial Clinic. Emily's influence extended far beyond academic achievements. She had established a peer mentoring program at her high school, supporting students dealing with family medical crises. The program, replicated across the city's school district, provided both emotional support and practical assistance to children walking paths similar to her own. Her weekly volunteer work at the clinic had evolved from helping in the pediatric playroom to assisting with patient education and support services. Children facing family health crises found in Emily a uniquely qualified mentor, someone who had walked their path and emerged stronger. Her ability to connect with these young people, to show them hope through example rather than just words, proved invaluable. The documentary about her story, Night Collector, had won several awards and sparked national conversations about healthcare access and child poverty. But Emily's most significant impact came through her personal interactions, the quiet moments when she could show others that survival was possible, that hardship could become strength. During her summers, Emily led workshops for healthcare providers, sharing her perspective as both a former patient's child and a future medical professional. Her insights helped shape new protocols for supporting families during medical crises, ensuring that children like her younger self wouldn't have to face such challenges alone. As she prepared for medical school, Emily's experiences continued to shape her path. Her goal wasn't just to become a doctor, but to transform how healthcare served vulnerable communities. She carried with her the lessons learned during those long nights, the importance of compassion, the power of community, and the knowledge that sometimes the most meaningful healing happened outside hospital walls. Martha Williams's legacy extended far beyond the walls of the James Bennett Memorial Clinic. The model she created, blending professional medical care with street-level understanding, revolutionized community healthcare delivery across the country. Her approach of healing with dignity became a blueprint for urban medical centers nationwide. The network of care she had built during her years on the street evolved into a formal system of community health workers, now certified and employed by hospitals throughout the region. These workers, many drawn from the homeless community she had once led, bridged the gap between traditional healthcare and those society often overlooked. Martha's training program for medical professionals, dubbed the Williams Protocol, became mandatory at several major medical schools. It emphasized the importance of understanding patients' social contexts alongside their medical conditions, teaching future doctors to see beyond symptoms to the full scope of human need. The annual Martha Williams Conference on Community Healthcare drew participants from around the world, sharing innovations in accessible medical care and strategies for reaching marginalized populations. Her keynote addresses, drawing from both her years as a celebrated surgeon and her time living on the streets, inspired a new generation of healthcare providers to think differently about their role in society. The foundation she helped establish grew to support similar initiatives in other cities, each adapting her principles to local needs while maintaining her core philosophy that true healing required both medical expertise and human understanding. Her published memoirs, From Hospital Halls to City Streets, became required reading in medical ethics courses. Perhaps her most lasting impact was in the lives she directly touched, the countless individuals who found in her example the courage to transform their own tragedies into sources of hope for others. The clinic's volunteer program, staffed largely by former patients and their families, embodied her belief in the healing power of giving back. Even in semi-retirement, Martha continued to walk her old routes, now accompanied by medical students learning to see the city through her experienced eyes. Her presence remained a reminder that compassion and clinical excellence were not opposing forces but essential partners in the art of healing. The transformation that began with one little girl collecting cans grew into a movement that reshaped the city's approach to healthcare and community support. The James Bennett Memorial Clinic became just the first of many centers combining medical excellence with social understanding, each new facility building on the lessons learned from Emily's story. Local businesses, inspired by Maxwell's example, established employee health funds and family support programs. The city's corporate culture shifted from viewing healthcare as an expense to seeing it as an investment in community well-being. Annual fundraising events, once focused on surface-level charity, now address systemic changes and long-term solutions. Schools across the district implemented early warning systems to identify students facing family medical crises, ensuring no child would have to shoulder such burdens alone. The Emily's Watch program provided support services from homework help to counseling for children whose parents were dealing with serious illnesses. The homeless community that had protected Emily found new purpose as trained community health workers and patient advocates. Their street knowledge, once dismissed as irrelevant, became recognized as essential expertise in reaching vulnerable populations. The network of mutual support they had built became a model for community-based care initiatives. The city's political landscape changed too, with healthcare access and family support becoming central issues in local elections. Policies were enacted to protect families facing medical crises, including rent control provisions for patients in long-term treatment and educational support for their children. Most significantly, the story continued to inspire new generations to view challenges as opportunities for change. Each year, the clinic hosted Night Collectors Day, where Emily's story was shared with young people facing similar struggles, showing them that their current circumstances need not define their future. The ripple effect spread beyond the city limits as other communities began adopting similar models of integrated healthcare and social support. What had started as one child's desperate effort to save her mother had grown into a movement, proving that the most powerful changes often begin with the smallest acts of determination and love. As we conclude this touching story of Emily's journey, we'd love to hear how it resonated with you. Please take a moment to share your thoughts and emotions in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. Don't keep this powerful message to yourself, share it with your friends and family who might find hope in Emily's courage. Every subscription, like, and share helps us continue creating meaningful content that inspires change. Would you like to hear part 2 of Emily's story? Let us know in the comments below. Your engagement fuels our passion to share these life-changing narratives.